We have come here to Vancouver, British Columbia. It is such a delight. And we are at the home of Daphne Marlatt. And we're so happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Well, I'm happy you're here.
Yeah, this has been fun. And Karis Shearer has come from Kelowna, British Columbia, which you would think is close by. But it's not. What is it, about 5 hours by car?
It's a 5-hour drive, a 45-minute flight, but much longer when you add weather to it, which was what happened today.
In the Okanagan Valley. And on the Okanagan River, a place I hope I get to see.
On a lake.
On a lake.
Yeah.
Lake.
But here we are in Vancouver, and in fact, we have a poem, which Daphne will tell us a little more about and then read, that is about, it's a Vancouver poem, really. It's about Vancouver. So I'm really excited to talk about it, partly as a way of understanding the poetry of Vancouver, or at least the place of Vancouver. So you want to tell us where it's from and tell us about that book you're holding?
Sure. This was the first edition, well, the only edition by itself of Vancouver poems, and many of these have found their way into Intertidal, my collected, but in revised form. This is one of the very few that was not revised. It was probably written in the late 1960s, and it's a harbor poem. It's about entering Vancouver Harbor by ship. It was a little
On the ferry, right?
CPR ferry that ran.
This is Scooter, by the
Vancouver
way. I
Island.
think Scooter wants to join us.
I think he does.
Scooter, you want to get up?
Scooter, up. Oh,
You can do it. You need some help.
He needs some help. His
This is
hind
great.
legs.
This is
His
the
hind
first-
legs aren't
This
quite
is the first
up to it.
ModPo video in
Now
which
turn around.
we had a dog break. Okay, Scooter. You were saying it's probably 69, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
So it's a long time ago now.
I probably wrote it when I was feeling homesick in Indiana.
Oh, so it's a recollection of Vancouver
Yeah,
poem.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you want to read it?
Air, a blanket, a wind, the sea flooding in to harbor. Sand flat, off the north shore, spit with harbor mark, not buoy, small white lighthouse shape, the light, thunder of cars on the bridge above, and the lights ahead. At reservation's edge, weeds soft, flash of sea, an aura of light in the water ahead. Blanket, a wind, the sea flooding in to harbor, wind, off the deck of ferry rounding a black flank of park, for the chain arc, the bridges, lit, causeway to, into, enter, arena of dark, at this hour empty, light. Car will rattle into off a wooden ramp man points the way from. Locked blocks, dull-lit bus standing on its round. Ferry now behind us, passenger hollow, and the engines idle. All its lights on, all its cars dispersed. What is this space between bodies of land a canoe rides, putting out from the shelter of a bay? This drowned coast, the Salish Squamish at tidal flat under the bridge, sea-going, saline. Embraced a pool of contact. Islands with common feet under the waves, the air, waves on our skin we stand in, rooted. Outside car, wind-swept, dark, incoming tide, silent other cars. Silent we are. In the wind coming into harbor, see a tidal race, and blowing into our mouths, into moving now, our mouths full kiss.
There's so many ways we can start talking about this, but I mean, I just want to somewhat randomly ask both of you about the role of silence here. Are they quiet, these people who have come by car across a body of water, presumably into the city? Mm-hmm. Are they quiet because of awe? Are they quiet for other? Why are they silent? It's really powerful to think about people in a somewhat social situation being quiet. Is it awe of the environment?
Well, yes, you could read it that way. I don't remember now, but certainly it was coming into the darkness of the city. At that, in those days, it wasn't the huge light display going on for hours and hours that it is now.
Yeah.
It was a much smaller city.
Yeah.
It was darker. There were still neon lights around, neon signs, but it was basically a darker city. And you approach it coming in under Lionsgate Bridge. You coming in, you see the lights of the cars over the bridge, but then there's a harbor. And in those days, there were no container ships. Very few. There would be grain freighters, but not much else. And then the dock, and it's silent, and everyone's gone from the ferry. This is probably one of the last cars off. And it's a sense of re-entry.
Mm-hmm. I live in a town, it has two rivers, Philadelphia, but this is a town that is very watery.
It's the watery part of the world.
It's the watery part of the world. Is that Moby Dick?
That's right.
Yeah.
Maria's story, Maria Hindmarch's story, the watery part of
Which
the world.
is a quotation from the first page of Moby Dick,
Yes.
probably, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Karis, you've thought a lot about this particular wateriness, I think, in Canadian writing. Vancouver being such an important place for Canadian poetry. How does the wateriness affect this re-entry into this city, or the way the poem is written?
I mean, I think, water in some ways is kind of liminal space in this poem, right? Because it's between the passage from land to land, and it's an element that facilitates the movement of the body of the car, the ferry. In some ways, I can't think of water without also thinking of air, right? Which is, of course, the title. So I'm going to kind of do a bit of a shift from water.
Yeah, I was waiting for somebody to talk about air.
Connection to air.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, that's kind of a question, right? What is the relationship between air and water? Those two elements in this poem. Air is a blanket. You have the kind of appositional phrase, right? It's a blanket, which is what is calm, is comforting.
It wraps them around.
Yeah.
It's a wind.
It's a wind.
It creates waves.
It creates waves. It has a surface impact, right? And in that first line, then we have the sea flooding in, which is related to, but is not the air itself.
Yes, they're certainly connected, and it's about tangibility. It seems to me this whole poem is about the tangible.
Yeah. Or making the tangible out of, famously in poetic tradition, the intangible, the wind, the air, the inspiration, which, now that we know this was a gee, I miss Vancouver, I'm in Indiana poem. Right, the inspiration, the source of, your creativity, presumably. So, I mean, sorry for another meta-poetic reading, but, we have the mouth here. Right, we do. And we have blowing. And we have air, and we have wind, and we have a poem. There's something really inspirational about this watery place with all of its wind, no?
It's about entrance, entering into.
Right.
And yeah, I probably was wanting very much in landlocked southern Indiana to enter back into this coastal city again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And counterintuitively, or maybe paradoxically, there's a breathing out and breathing in. So it's almost as if when they arrive outside, car wind swept dark, or wind swept dark, incoming tide, stuff is coming in. It's almost as if the wind has kind of taken their breath away. And that maybe the silence is the kind of body awe of like,
Yeah. The awe of simply being there, being present to it all. Yeah. And I want to say something about the punctuation,
Please.
because the punctuation is very sound-based. It's not conventional punctuation. The punctuation is meant to mark the slight pauses that create the rhythmic movement of the poem.
Mm-hmm.
And although it looks like prose, these are actually line ends. I see them as line ends, because the first line, the first word of the following line gets a little extra hit at the end of a pause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karis, a great poet, and I think it's obvious to us that we are in the presence of a great poet in the middle of a poem which seems to be a scene poem, ferry ride, about a city, a beloved place, asks a question, a big question: what is this space between bodies of land? A canoe rides, so does a kind of disjunctive thing grammatically. And then we get back to the First Nation. So I have two questions for both of you. One is, maybe I invite you to say what's so great about that moment. I think we both agree that that's a great moment. What is the question that's being asked? How do we get back from this car ferry to canoes and then to the First Nation, and presumably thinking about seagoing in a more original, basic human way?
Yeah, I think this poem is doing some of the things that I love about this book in general, which is it's thinking about indigeneity, and how land and water signifies, prior to the arrival of settler colonials. It's thinking about what that land means for Indigenous people. What is the space between bodies of land? What is that space for whom?
Yeah, and how a canoe was equivalent of a road for the people living here. This was their form of mode of contact. So it's the space that a canoe rides, going from one point of land to another point of land. Yeah.
So there's both a contrast between us now with our ferries.
That's right.
And those who came before, who used this, they put out from is the idiom.
Putting out from the bay.
Yeah. Contrast, because this group turns out to be standing in and rooted. Rooted partly because they seem still. The car, they didn't do anything to get it. They just put the car and they sat in I think they ran the car.
Yeah,
you kind of run the car and it comes over. And then, so they're rooted. Rooted is negative and positive. It's negative in the sense that we didn't put out from anywhere, and we didn't do a canoe ride.
Right.
And we aren't seagoing, really, seagoing.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
But it's also rooted in a good sense. On our skin, we stand in, rooted. We are here. We love this place, and we want to connect.
Right. Right. In the immigrant's anxiety about not being rooted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who's dislocated and far away from the scene. You use the phrase tidal race. Do you want to? It's all old poems.
I don't mean. I didn't mean race in the sense
you
of
mean speed
racial.
Along.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, because the current does wonderful sort of whirlpooly things.
Right.
As it enters the first narrows, which is what Lionsgate Bridge arcs over, and even more so when it enters the second narrows, which this ferry didn't go to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question, but I know nothing about the watery science of it. But I know in New York, the East River has a current, but it also is tidal, so it goes in different directions. And I think something like that is happening here. You're interested in rivers and currents, but there's a lot of tidal.
There's a lot of tidal. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because the tide comes in to this long inlet. It comes in and it goes out.
Right.
And the water levels change all the time.
Right.
So there's constant movement, constant change. And then you have the currents driven by the narrowing of the course of the water by the land, the neck of land on each side.
Yeah.
That's the park, that's Stanley Park
Right.
that the ferry is passing by.
Right.
And it's very dark at night. Nothing you can see, and it's slightly mysterious.
The relationship between sea, which is tidal, and river, which is flow, is a
Except
big...
there's no river here. There's no river here. This is just inlet.
So it's river-like in the sense that it's not river, it doesn't function
not,
like a
no.
river, but, you know, I just today looked at the Google map of, you know, there's just so many little channels all around. But it enabled people to navigate, whereas open sea, you can't
Yeah.
navigate. So it's transportation,
Right,
which is what's
right.
happening here. And back to mouths then.
It's transportation and connection now.
Right,
That was the
right,
First Nations experience of connection.
right. And the tidal race, or the tidal quality of it, is what blows the air into our mouths,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
the tide comes in with air,
Right.
and
It's
so
wind from the ferry too.
it ends with into our mouths, into parentheses, moving now, our mouths full kiss. So intimacy comes from this,
Well, there's different kinds of intimacy in this poem. There's the intimacy of the air that wraps like a blanket around you standing on deck.
nice,
And then there's the intimacy of the two in the car,
mm-hmm.
having gone through the experience of re-entry together
Right.
in the dark.
Right.
Yeah.
So intertidal is, I'm extracting, intertidal is the name of the collected earlier poems, and this poem is in here. Intertidal is not just about the landscape and the ecology, but about human interrelation, intertidal. Can you say a little more? That's a big question because it's a crucial word for you.
It is a crucial word, and it is actually, it represents a meeting space. It's the intertidal space is the space where the sea and the land don't quite meet. Sometimes at high tide it'll be covered with sea, but then those like very high tides. But it's marginal, and so where people meet, hopefully in poetry, is where the listener or the reader meets the poem in a way that the maker of the poem would like it to move to the reader. That the reader gets that movement of meaning and sound at the same time.
And that's a full kiss.
That's a full kiss.
That
That's
is
a full kiss.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
Our Mouth's Full Kiss is not just a poem being blown out at you by someone reading it, but taking that breath in as the wind enters your own mouth.
Sure.
That's a
Yeah.
kiss. Wow. How cool. Shall we do final thoughts on this? Each of us maybe has one more thing they want to say about this poem that didn't get said yet. And I'm looking at you both.
Can I pick up on?
Yeah, absolutely, on that intertidal full kiss.
Well, yeah, the idea of re-entry. Can I bring us to the word enter, which is in capital letters here, as is the word light. I'm tempted to kind of understand that as you working in a proprioceptive mode again. Is that a sign? Is that kind of a documentary element here that we're bringing in, or is it a kind of a way of lending emphasis to a particular word?
It's a way of lending emphasis, but it's also a way of indicating enough hesitation, because it catches the eye right, enough hesitation to actually get the fullness of what follows, which is the arena of dark. And then that's opposed to light.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daphne, final thought from you about this? What was it like re-encountering it? We can confess here.
Yeah, we can.
That when I suggested that we talk about this poem, it took you a little while to figure out that you had written a poem by this title.
Called Air, yes.
That's not just forgetting. There's a lot of poems in Intertitle, but it strikes me as a fairly crucial idea for you, this poem.
Air?
Well, air and this thing that we were just talking about at the end.
Yeah. It is a crucial thing, but it would take too long to talk about that because it's all tied up with the immigrant experience.
Right, but can you
and
say...
creating a sense of, we talked about rooted.
Yeah.
Rooted has many, many meanings for me. And one of them I won't get into because it would take the telling of a whole myth. There's a Vancouver poem about it.
Mm-hmm. In the book, Vancouver.
Yeah, it's a Kwakwakawa myth. But
Is there a short version of your concern about being an immigrant?
Yeah, because as I recently heard at the Writers' Festival, I heard the Malaysian writer Tash Shaw being interviewed by Eleanor Wartell. It was a very interesting interview. And one of the things he said that really struck me was, because he's now living in London, he said, when you're an immigrant or an emigrant, there's a form of anxiety that you never get over. And I think that's really true. And it's the anxiety of difference, of feeling that there's something going on here that you never participated in, and you don't fully understand the parameters of it.
Right. And this is why, at least for me, in reading this poem and wanting to talk about it, is so moving about this, because its entry contemplates first entry to classic immigrant experience,
Right.
But is re-entry, but it reproduces the same concerns one had at first entry.
Yeah.
Which is respectful of those who were here earlier.
That's right.
And that's partly what this poem is sensitive about.
Yeah. And curious about it. Like how, I mean, this was just a little nod at that. And it's interesting, long after I wrote Vancouver Poems, I found out that during the big fire that decimated early Vancouver, before it was even Vancouver, it was the Squamish people coming over in canoes who were rescuing. The whole place burnt down except for the cannery, really. Well, it wasn't a cannery then, it was a lumber mill, except for the lumber mill. And the Squamish were coming over in canoes. They could see the smoke and the fire rising, the flames rising, and they came over to help settlers, save them.
The silence at the end it's beginning to be clear, at least to me, that it is awe. If someone were to make, I hope nobody makes a movie out of this poem. The poem should stand.
I hope not either.
But if somebody made a movie out of it, the people who arrived and stepped off the ferry would be in awe of this place, and they would just be standing there, rooted. Daphne, thank you so much for this. Karis, thanks for hanging out with us. And Scooter,
Thank you, Al.
thank you. You've been very patient.
Yes, he has. It's way past his dinner hour.
Oh, you said the D word.
Yeah, I did. And he
Okay.
licked his lips.
Well, he licked his lips. We should all be so Pavlovian. Thank you again.